A millionaire comes home earlier than expected and almost faints at what he sees. The black luxury car stopped in front of the massive iron gates of the Hale mansion nearly 4 hours earlier than usual. The clock on the dashboard had just struck exactly 11 in the morning, a time when Richard Hale should have been sitting on the top floor of his corporate headquarters, inside a cold glass boardroom, deciding the fate of thousands of people with nothing more than a nod of his head. But today, Richard could not be there. A blinding headache, as if someone were striking his temples with a hammer, combined with a tight, suffocating pressure in his chest for no clear reason, had forced him to leave the meeting halfway through. Not because of exhaustion, not because of illness, but because of a vague, unsettling premonition. The kind of instinct a man who is accustomed to controlling everything rarely allows himself to trust. The front doors of the mansion closed behind him with a dry, echoing thud. There was no greeting, no hurried footsteps of the staff, none of the familiar sounds of a house filled with life. There was only silence, a thick, oppressive silence, as though even the marble walls themselves were holding their breath. Richard loosened his tie and tossed it onto the cold stone console table, his hand trembling slightly. He hated this silence, hated it with a painful intensity. 2 years ago, this house had not been like this. 2 years ago, there had still been laughter here. There had still been the gentle voice of the woman he loved. And there had still been the soft patter of a little girl who used to run down the hallways, calling out "Daddy" in a clear, innocent voice. Now all of it was gone. His wife had died after that fateful accident, and his daughter Lily had fallen silent, completely silent. The doctors called it selective mutism caused by psychological trauma. Richard simply called it the heaviest sentence ever passed on a father. He could buy anything: shares, companies, power, reputation. But he could not buy back his child's voice. Richard walked slowly along the long carpet leading deeper into the house, his expensive Italian leather shoes echoing alone in the empty space. He intended to go up to his study, take his medication, and then sleep. Perhaps if he could sleep for a while, everything would feel a little less unbearable. Richard had just stepped onto the first stair when he heard it. At first he thought it was only a hallucination, a side effect of the headache tightening around his brain. He froze, one hand gripping the wooden railing, closed his eyes for a few seconds to steady himself. Then the sound came again. Laughter, not the polished social laughter of business partners at expensive cocktail parties. Not the restrained, practiced laughter Diana always wore whenever cameras were pointed at her, but a sound that was pure, bursting, completely unrestrained. The laughter of a child. Richard's heart slammed so hard it sent a sharp pain through his chest. He stood perfectly still, holding his breath, as if even the slightest movement might cause that miracle to vanish. That sound, he knew it. He had heard it in old videos, recorded on a phone many years ago, before the accident, before his world collapsed, before Lily fell silent. Lily! The name escaped his throat as nothing more than a trembling breath. Without thinking further, Richard moved toward the sound of laughter. His steps slowed instinctively. The hard soles of his leather shoes were far too loud on the stone floor, so he stopped, bent down, slipped them off, and continued forward in nothing but his socks. The laughter led him to the end of the west corridor, to the towering glass doors of the greenhouse. That place, the place he had avoided for 2 years. The greenhouse had once been his wife's pride and joy, a structure of steel and glass flooded with light, greenery, and life. But since the day she died, Richard had not stepped inside even once. The memories here were too sharp. They cut into his flesh whenever he came too close. But now that laughter pulled him forward like an invisible thread. Richard stood before the slightly open glass doors. The scent of damp soil, jasmine, and fresh green leaves spilled out, striking his senses all at once. He reached out and gently pushed the door, his heart racing wildly, like a man about to face a ghost. And then he saw it. The midday sunlight poured through the glass roof, bathing the greenhouse in a warm, almost sacred golden glow. Among the tall fern pots and the soft draping orchid vines, Emma Cruz stood there. She wore a pale blue maid's uniform, her white apron still clean. In her hands were a pair of yellow rubber gloves, an oddly misplaced detail in such a delicate space. But Emma was not cleaning. She was slowly spinning in place, and on her shoulders 2 tiny hands were gripping tightly into her dark hair. Lily, his daughter. Lily threw her head back, her mouth open in a full, ringing burst of laughter, the sound echoing against the glass walls. Emma made gentle, whooshing airplane noises, turning carefully in slow circles, while Lily clapped her hands against her shoulders, laughing louder with every spin. Richard stood frozen at the threshold of the greenhouse, too afraid to even breathe deeply. He was terrified that a single careless sound might cause that miraculous moment to dissolve like morning mist. But fate always has a way of reminding people that nothing perfect can last forever. When he unconsciously took one more step forward, his bare heel struck something hard on the floor. Clang! A metal watering can rolled across the tiled ground, releasing a harsh, echoing crash that rang through the glass structure like a gunshot. Lily's laughter died instantly. Emma spun around. Her eyes widened in panic. The color drained from her face in a split second when she saw Richard standing there, tall, silent, powerful, and completely out of place in the fragile little world she had just created. In Emma's mind, that moment was not tenderness. It was a professional death sentence. "Mr. Richard," she stammered, her voice trembling. Her yellow-gloved hands tightened around Lily's legs as she gently lowered the child to the floor, instinctively shielding the girl's head with her own body. I can explain. I had finished cleaning downstairs and Lily was crying and She lowered her head, waiting for the fury. But what happened next left both Emma and Lily frozen. Lily did not run. She did not shrink back. She did not retreat into the shadows the way she always did when Richard appeared. The little girl stood straight in front of Emma, both tiny hands gripping the hem of her blue skirt, lifting her face to look at her father, with a stubborn, defiant gaze Richard had never seen in his daughter before. She was protecting her. Richard opened his mouth to say something, but his throat seemed locked shut. Before him now was no longer a frightened maid, but the image of his daughter, the child he had been unable to reach for 2 years, standing up for someone else. His knees went weak. Without warning, Richard dropped to his knees on the cold greenhouse tiles. His expensive slacks soaked through. His knees burned with pain, but he felt nothing except the agony in his chest. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. He looked up at Emma from his lowest position. "Don't apologize. Never apologize for this." Tears spilled down his face uncontrollably. Richard turned to Lily, his eyes red and swollen, and slowly, carefully reached out his hand, as if approaching a wild bird. He was used to her stepping back. But this time Lily did not retreat. She looked at Emma. Emma, still trembling, gave a faint nod, almost imperceptible. Lily took a small step forward and placed her tiny hand against her father's tear-wet cheek. The touch sent a current straight through Richard's body. A strangled sob broke from his chest as he pulled his daughter tightly into his arms. The fragile moment inside the greenhouse had not yet settled when Richard's phone began to vibrate inside the suit jacket he had casually hung on the glass door. The sharp sound sliced through the newly born tenderness like a blade. Richard quickly wiped his tears away, drew in a hurried breath, and pulled out his phone. The name on the screen made his entire body stiffen. Diana Moore. A short message. No exclamation marks, no emojis. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Make sure everything is neat. There will be reporters with me for wedding photos. If the girl has one of her episodes, don't let her appear. Richard read the message again and again. His chest tightened. He looked at Lily clinging to his neck, then at Emma standing off to the side, still shaken from the earlier fright. The bubble of peace burst. "Emma," Richard said, his voice returning to the low, firm tone of a man accustomed to giving orders, though something in his eyes had changed. "Take Lily upstairs to bathe her. Put her in her prettiest dress. And you should change as well." Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She lifted Lily into her arms. The child protested softly, her hands tightening around Richard's collar, but Emma whispered something into her ear that calmed her. The two of them left the greenhouse by the service staircase. Richard remained alone among the orchid pots, straightened his jacket, and drew in a deep breath. He had no idea that he was preparing for the first confrontation between two worlds. 10 minutes later, the front doors swung open. The sharp clicking of high heels against marble echoed through the grand hall like a countdown clock. Diana strode in without waiting for an invitation, removed her designer sunglasses from her flawless face, and tossed her crocodile skin handbag onto an antique table without the slightest concern for scratching it. "God, it's unbearably hot," she complained to the empty air. "Richard, why is the air conditioning set so low? I'm practically melting." Richard stood on the staircase, his face restored to its perfect mask of indifference, the one he wore in thousands of meetings. Diana scanned him from head to toe with a sharp gaze. "You changed your tie? That color doesn't flatter your eyes. I told you already." She stepped closer and planted a careless kiss on his cheek, leaving behind a perfume so overpowering that Richard had to restrain himself from frowning. The scent collided violently with the damp earth and truth he had just left behind in the greenhouse. "Where's the girl?" Diana asked, her voice sweet as honey, yet cold as ice. "Don't tell me she's running around. I hate messes." At that moment, Emma appeared from the side hallway. She had changed into a clean uniform, her hair neatly pinned up. Lily clutched her hand, her head lowered, wearing a pretty pale pink dress, yet her eyes avoided everyone. Diana's expression shifted instantly, from indifferent to contemptuous. "Oh," she scoffed, "here comes the mute princess." A surge of heat shot up Richard's neck. Diana bent to look at Lily, but her eyes did not soften. She turned to Emma, squinting as if trying to recall an unimportant detail. "And you are who, exactly? The new one?" "Yes, my name is Emma Cruz, ma'am," Emma replied softly, lowering her head politely. "Emma," Diana nodded, then suddenly pointed at her own high heels. "Look, I stepped on something filthy outside. Clean it. Now. I don't want to bring bacteria onto the carpet." Emma loosened her grip on Lily to comply, but Lily did not let go. The little girl stepped forward, positioning herself between Emma and Diana, her small arms spreading awkwardly like a tiny shield. Lily lifted her eyes to the woman, not with fear, but with wary alertness. Diana gave a soft, hollow laugh. "See, Richard?" she said, turning to him. "The girl's already been influenced. That woman is corrupting her." Richard looked at his daughter hiding behind Emma's skirt, and for the first time in his life he realized a truth that chilled his heart piece by piece. The woman he was about to marry did not love his daughter at all. The photo team arrived and left within an hour. Diana shone in front of the cameras as if she had been born for it, radiant smile, sparkling eyes, her hand resting possessively on Richard's arm. No one mentioned Emma. Lily was kept upstairs in the playroom with Emma. When the last photographer left, Diana let out a breath and kicked her high heels aside. "I'm exhausted. Richard, I'm starving. Tell the kitchen to prepare lunch." Richard nodded to the housekeeper, Margaret. Set the table for 3. Diana, who was checking photos on her phone, snapped her head up. 3? Who else? Are you having guests? Emma will eat with us. Emma? Diana frowned. Richard, you know Lily doesn't eat properly. She just sits there staring at her food and crying. It ruins the whole atmosphere. Today will be different. Richard turned to Margaret. Call Emma down. Have her bring Lily. Diana jumped to her feet. Emma, that maid? Why are you calling her down? She will eat with us? Silence. 1 second. 2, 3. Then Diana laughed, sharp as a razor blade. You're joking, right? You want a servant to sit at our table? With me? Richard, do you even know how much this dining table costs? Italian black walnut, Brazilian onyx top, and you want a minimum wage maid who smells like bleach to sit on Hermes leather chairs? Diana. No, she waved him off. There's order in this house. Masters are masters, servants are servants. If you want to do charity, give her more money. Don't bring her to my dining table. Richard stood up. He said nothing. He only looked at her. That look, cold, distant, like he was staring at a stranger. The door opened. Emma appeared, holding Lily in her arms. Emma, Richard said, his voice not loud, but leaving no room for refusal. Sit down at the table. Eat with us. The room fell into absolute silence. Diana slammed her wineglass onto the table. The sound of crystal striking wood cut sharply through the air. Are you joking, Richard? Emma stood frozen. Lily clung tightly around her neck, sensing the storm that was forming. Richard turned to look at her, his gaze cold as steel. You should start getting used to this, he said. Otherwise, I may have to reconsider certain things. The words landed like an invisible slap. Trembling, Emma walked forward. She placed Lily into the high chair and then sat beside her, barely touching the edge of the seat, as if afraid to soil the expensive velvet upholstery. The meal began under a heavy, suffocating tension. But then, a miracle happened. Lily ate. Emma carefully cut the salmon into tiny pieces and patiently lifted them toward her. The airplane is coming, she whispered. Lily let out a soft laugh, a small sound, yet powerful enough to shatter the deathly silence in the room. Richard's heart tightened at the sight. His daughter was eating. She was living. Diana did not eat. Her eyes were locked on Emma, no longer with contempt, but with pure jealousy. She was being pushed out of the role of the perfect woman. Enough, Diana suddenly snapped. Stop those ridiculous noises. Emma lowered her head. I'm sorry, ma'am. I just want Lily. You're spoiling her, Diana cut in, taking a sip of red wine. And the smell of bleach on you makes me nauseous. Then, with a movement disturbingly precise, Diana deliberately flung the wine straight at Emma. Lily screamed in terror. Emma sprang up on instinct, stammering as she tried to wipe the stain with her bare hands, only spreading the dark blotches wider. Oh! Diana covered her mouth, eyes wide in fake alarm. My hand slipped. I'm so sorry, Emma. Truly sorry. Richard shot to his feet. The chair behind him crashed backward with a thunderous bang. He stared at the wine soaking into Emma's clothes. Then he looked at Diana. The air in the dining room was still thick with the scent of red wine and humiliation when Lily suddenly began to cry violently. She stretched her arms toward the door, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks in fear. I want to take her outside, Richard said quietly, more to steady himself than to speak to Diana. Then take her, Diana replied irritably. Let her get some air. I have a headache. Richard carried Lily into the back garden and pushed open the tall glass doors leading to the stone-paved terrace. A cool spring breeze swept through, bringing the scent of young grass and lake water. Lily wriggled gently in his arms and pointed toward the distance, where brightly colored flowers swayed in the light. Richard set her down. This garden was safe. There were fences. There were cameras. He only meant to let Lily walk a few steps to calm down. But he did not notice the swimming pool on the lower level. As Richard turned his back to close the door, Diana remained in the dining room, muttering complaints about the few drops of wine on her dress. No one noticed Lily as she curiously chased a blue butterfly skimming over the surface of the water. Lily reached the edge of the pool. One slipping step. Splash. The sound of water breaking rang out sharply. And then silence. Richard spun around. Lily! He ran, but the distance was too far. In that moment, a single, cruel moment, Emma saw everything. She had just finished changing into her everyday clothes and was walking down the hallway toward the garden when, through the glass, she saw the little pink dress vanish beneath the dark blue water. Lily! Emma's scream tore through the space. She ran straight outside, without stopping, without removing her shoes, without thinking about the cold or the depth. She jumped. Emma's body struck the water hard. The cold sliced into her skin like knives. She opened her eyes beneath the blurred surface and saw Lily sinking, her little arms flailing wildly. Emma grabbed the child, kicked violently, and poured the last of her strength into forcing them back up. "I've got you! I've got you!" she gasped, keeping Lily's head above the surface. Richard reached the pool just as Emma broke the surface, Lily clutched in her arms. "Give her to me!" he shouted. Emma struggled toward the edge, her hands trembling from cold and exhaustion. Richard dropped to his knees, pulled Lily up, and wrapped the little girl tightly in his suit jacket. Lily coughed and cried violently. But she was alive. Emma had no strength left. Her soaked jeans dragged her downward. She tried to grip the pool edge but slipped. Richard reached out and hauled her up. Emma collapsed onto the grass, coughing up water, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. Only then did Diana appear. She walked slowly across the lawn, carefully avoiding dirtying her high heels. "Oh my, that was almost a disaster," Diana said with a frown. "Richard, be careful with your jacket. It's Italian silk." She glanced at Emma, soaked and lying on the ground. "She's soaked the entire walkway. Don't let her into the main house. The Persian carpets are very expensive." Richard lifted Lily into his arms and held her tightly against his chest. He walked past Diana. He did not look at her, as if she did not exist. Diana stood there in the garden, blonde hair lifting in the evening wind, and for the first time in her life, she felt invisible. When Diana went upstairs to change and Emma took Lily back to her room to rest, Richard turned and walked quickly toward his study. The heavy wooden door shut behind him with a sharp click, a sound that felt like the full stop to all pretense. Richard's study was a fortress. Dark oak, leather, bulletproof glass. This was the place that once made rivals' hands tremble when they stepped inside. But today, it felt like a war command center. Richard did not sit down. He went straight to the abstract painting on the wall and pressed a nearly invisible spot. The painting slid aside, revealing the security control panel. He entered the code. A large screen lit up. The mansion's camera system, installed after his wife's death because of a security obsession he had never truly used, now displayed every room, every blind corner in brutal clarity. "Show me the truth," Richard muttered. He accessed old footage, 2 days ago. 2:22 p.m. The main living room appeared on screen. Lily was sitting on the carpet, surrounded by expensive dolls that had never been touched. On the sofa, Diana had her legs propped on the table, scrolling on her phone. Richard turned up the volume. "I'm serious," Diana's voice rang out clearly. "He's boring to death. All he ever talks about is money and stocks. But the ring is worth it. Have you seen this diamond? Once we're married and he stresses himself into a heart attack, I'll be the richest widow in the country." Richard felt his stomach twist, but that wasn't the worst of it. In the video, Lily stood up, walked toward Diana, tugged timidly at her sleeve, and pointed toward the kitchen, a small, hesitant gesture. She was hungry. "Get away!" Diana snapped, nudging Lily with the tip of her foot. "Look at you! Filthy! Disgusting!" The door flew open. Emma rushed in, panic on her face. "Take that thing upstairs," Diana ordered, eyes never leaving her phone. "It pollutes the air in here, and don't feed it anything. If you feed her, you're fired." Richard froze the frame. His hand shook so badly he could barely keep the mouse steady. He fast-forwarded. 1 hour later, the playroom camera. Lily was curled in a corner, stomach aching with hunger, crying without sound. The door opened slowly. Emma slipped inside, glanced down the hallway, then closed the door behind her. She pulled a small plastic container from beneath her apron. "Shh! Here you go," Emma whispered. "Milk porridge. My mom made it. It's really good. But eat quickly. This is our secret." Richard watched as Emma blew on each spoonful, patiently waiting for Lily to swallow. The little girl ate desperately, then wrapped her arms around Emma like a drowning child clinging to a lifeline. "Nobody will hurt you while I'm here, Princess," Emma said softly. "You're very brave. You matter." Richard felt his vision blur. He changed the date. Last Friday, the side entrance camera. Emma walked in carrying a cheap shopping bag. Richard zoomed in. Not groceries for herself, but toys for Lily. Wooden puzzles, coloring books, modeling clay. He opened another window on the screen. The employee payroll. Name, Emma Cruz. Salary, legal minimum. In the footage, Emma sat on her bed counting the last coins left in her wallet, worry etched across her face. "She used her own money," Richard whispered. The camera switched scenes. Playroom. Emma and Lily sat on the floor, shaping clay. "This is you," Emma said. "And this is your daddy?" Lily bent over, concentrating, then a small sound escaped her. Rough, shaky, but clear. "Daddy!" Richard froze. He rewound, listened again. "Daddy?" His daughter had spoken, not to him, but to the maid. Richard slumped back in his chair, covering his face. The truth stood bare, cruel, undeniable. While he was busy making money, a poor woman had given her time, her presence, and her love to raise his daughter. And the woman he was about to marry had brought nothing but poison. Richard clenched his fist and slammed it onto the desk. His gold pen jumped. "Enough," he growled. Night fell over the Hale mansion in a silence unlike the daytime. It was no longer the cold stillness of wealth, but the strained quiet of a house that had just survived a panic. The electronic thermometer let out a sharp beep. Richard looked at the number on the screen, and his heart sank. 39.7 degrees Celsius. Lily lay curled on the large bed, her cheeks flushed deep red, her tiny body shivering in waves. The fall into the cold pool and the emotional shock had crushed her already fragile immune system. "Easy, my love," Richard whispered, placing his hand on her forehead. Lily's skin burned beneath his palm. He had never felt so helpless. In his life, every problem could be solved with decisions, money, or power, but none of those could lower his daughter's fever. The bedroom door flew open. Diana appeared, glamorous as if she were about to step onto a red carpet. A tight crimson evening gown clung to her body, jewels glittering beneath the lights. "Richard, I've been waiting in the car for 20 minutes, she said, checking her watch. "The charity gala starts in half an hour." Richard did not turn around. "Lily's fever is almost 40 degrees, he said hoarsely. "She needs a doctor." Diana sighed impatiently, standing several steps away from the bed as if afraid of catching something. "Kids get fevers all the time. Did you give her medicine? She'll sleep and be fine by morning. We can't be late. The press will—" "I'm not going," Richard cut in. The air in the room froze. Diana narrowed her eyes. "What did you say?" "I'm staying." Richard turned to face her. My daughter almost died today. I am not leaving this room." The perfect mask on Diana's face cracked. "You're choosing a minor fever over our future now? Ever since that maid showed up? You've changed." Richard did not answer. Grinding her teeth, Diana spun around and slammed the door. The fading click of her heels down the hallway carried away the glittering world Richard once thought mattered. Only Lily's uneven breathing remained in the room. A few minutes later, the door opened again, this time without a sound. Emma stepped inside. She had changed into dry clothes and now wore simple cotton pajamas. In her hands were a basin of warm water and several neatly folded white towels. "Let me help," Emma said softly. Richard instinctively stepped aside. Emma dipped a towel into the water, wrung it gently, and laid it on Lily's forehead. Almost immediately, Lily stopped whimpering. Emma continued wiping her wrists, the nape of her neck, every movement slow, precise, practiced. "Warm water prevents the body from going into shock," Emma explained quietly. "The medicine needs time." Richard sat down in the chair against the wall and watched in silence. He saw Lily, even in her haze, reach out for Emma. And Emma took the child's hand and did not let go. Time passed. The clock read 2:48 a.m. when Lily's temperature finally began to drop. She slept more deeply, her breathing evening out. Emma stood to leave. "Don't go," Richard said. Emma froze. "If she wakes up and doesn't see you, she'll panic," he added, his voice low. "Please, stay a little longer." Emma sat down in the chair across from him. The two remained silent for a long while. You've taken care of someone like this before, haven't you?" Richard asked quietly. Emma lowered her head, her hands clenched together. "I once had a daughter," she said in almost a whisper. "Her name was Sophia. She was Lily's age when she died." Richard held his breath. "She had pneumonia," Emma continued. "I did everything I knew, sponged her down, sang to her, but I didn't have money for a good hospital. Sophia passed away in my arms." Tears slid silently down Emma's face. "When I met Lily," she said, looking toward the bed, "I saw my child again, and I thought maybe the love I still had left could save someone." Richard lowered his head. In that moment, he understood that this woman had not only saved his daughter from the pool, she had saved her from loneliness. The next morning, the Hale mansion sank into an unusual stillness. There were no more hurried clicks of Diana's heels, no more clouds of heavy perfume drifting through the hallways. Only pale gray sunlight slipping through the curtains and the steady breathing of Lily, fast asleep. The fever had broken. Richard had been sitting beside his daughter's bed since before dawn. He had not left. He had not slept. Each time Lily stirred, he immediately leaned forward, placing his hand on her back as if fearing that even a single second away would cause everything to collapse again. The door opened softly. Emma stepped in, carrying a cup of hot tea. Relief flickered across her eyes when she saw that Lily's face was no longer flushed. "She's okay," Emma said quietly. "She just needs rest." Richard nodded, but his gaze was different now. It was no longer the look of a man swept by emotion. It held the cold clarity of someone who had just made an important decision. "Diana won't give up," he said softly. "She'll strike again." Emma froze. "You mean—" "She won't accept losing control," Richard continued. "And her next target will be you." The words weighed down the room. "But don't worry," Richard added. "I've seen enough." He stood, stepped into the hallway, and walked straight to his study. The painting slid aside. The screen lit up. This time, Richard did not look at the past. He switched the cameras to live recording. Diana appeared on the screen in the living room. She was on the phone, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "Yes," Diana said. "Today. I want her gone. A complaint letter, a few tears for the press. She's just a maid. Who would believe her?" Richard pressed save. Not long after, Diana marched straight toward the kitchen, where Emma was preparing porridge for Lily. "You," Diana called, her sweetness painfully fake. "Pack your things. I've called your replacement." Emma turned around, confused. "But Mr. Richard isn't here," Diana cut in, "and I am the mistress of this house." At that moment, "No," a voice rang out behind Diana. Richard stepped in, phone in hand, his calm frighteningly absolute. "I am still here." Diana spun around. You're not going to work?" "No," Richard said. "I stayed home to see your true face." He placed the phone on the counter and turned on the speaker. Diana's voice from the earlier call echoed clearly through the kitchen. Diana's face drained of color. "Richard, you misunderstood." "Enough," Richard interrupted. "I've given you too many chances." He turned to Emma. "You're staying." Then he faced Diana directly. "And you," he said slowly, each word falling like a hammer blow. "Prepare to leave my life. Por Dieu." The air in the kitchen was so heavy it felt as if it could suffocate the breath itself. Diana stood frozen in the middle of the room, her lips pressed tight, her eyes wavering for a brief second. But then her familiar arrogance quickly returned. "What game are you playing, Richard?" She let out a brittle laugh. "You trust some vague recording more than your own fiancé?" Richard did not answer at once. He stepped forward and placed himself between Diana and Emma. A simple gesture, yet one that openly declared war. He raised his hand and activated another video on the auxiliary screen in the kitchen. The footage appeared. A video of Diana kicking Lily. A video of Diana shouting, "Don't feed her!" A video of Diana calling his daughter a demon. Diana's face drained of color. Richard, let me explain." "Explain what?" Richard stepped forward, one slow step at a time. "Explain starving my child? Explain standing there while she was drowning? Explain calling her a demon? She's a problematic child. You know that." "The only problem in this house is you," Richard shouted, for the first time in his life. Diana staggered back, eyes wide. "You think I didn't know?" Richard continued, his voice icy. "You've been waiting for me to die. You've been counting the days until you could become a rich widow. You don't love me. You don't love Lily. You only love my money." "Richard, I love you." "Silence!" Richard pointed at the screen. "I have 30 days of footage. Every day you abused my daughter. My lawyer has copies as well. Do you want to see how a court will rule?" Diana stood there, trembling, the perfect mask shattered. Beneath it was a beast cornered and exposed. "I won't let this go," she snarled. "I'll go to the press. I'll say you abandoned your fiancé for a servant. I'll ruin you." Richard laughed, a cold, humorless laugh. "You think I'm afraid? I own 3 newspapers. I hold shares in 5 television networks. You want to play the media game with me?" He stepped closer until he was face to face with Diana. "You have 10 minutes to pack. Jewelry, clothes, handbags, everything I bought for you, stays. You leave my house with only what you brought." "You can't." 9 minutes." Diana stared at Richard, into eyes that no longer held a trace of love. And she understood. The game was over. "You'll regret this," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Both you and that maid. You will regret it." She spun on her heel and ran out. Her high heels clattered wildly on the stairs. Richard remained standing there, watching her go. No regret, no longing, only relief. Time passed quietly. It did not arrive with financial headlines or lavish parties, but with mornings filled with birdsong, with small hands holding on to grown ones, with simple things repeated day after day. The following spring, the back garden of the Hale mansion burst into life. The young oak from the greenhouse had been transplanted into the soil. It was not tall yet, had not begun to cast shade, but its roots had taken hold deep in the earth. Richard packed the soil with his own hands. Emma watered it. Lily crouched beside them, serious like a true little gardener. "This tree grows slowly," Lily said, repeating her father's words. "But it's strong." Richard smiled. "Like our family." Emma placed her hand on his shoulder. Nothing more needed to be said. Lily talks a lot now, not always fluently, but every sentence is listened to. She talks about her dreams, about butterflies, about trees, about Mama Sophia in the sky, whom Emma still mentions gently, without avoidance. No one tries to erase the past. They place it where it belongs. One afternoon, as the sun sank behind the greenhouse, Lily ran over and wrapped her arms around both of them. "Daddy, you know," she said, "our home is like a garden." Richard bent down. "Because there are trees?" Lily shook her head. "Because everyone has to take care of it, for it to live." Emma pulled the child into her arms. In that moment, Richard understood something he had spent his entire life searching for. He did not become the richest man because of money. He became the richest man because he had a place to return to.